All right, welcome to chapter 5. This is part 1. We're going to talk about energy in various stages of part 1 through part 4 as it stands. This is it's going to be a presentation. It's going to be a little bit different from what you may be expecting. I hope you'll enjoy at least my perspective about this topic. So we're going to talk about how energy flows from the sun and to all life on Earth, what photosynthesis is, and how it uses light energy. Okay, and it makes we say food, but it's really glucose for the storage of high energy uh, in the form of chemical bonds that's later harvested. We'll talk about how that happens, and then how that glucose is transformed into the form of ATP, and which is a simplified way of acquiring chemical bond energy that's utilized across the board for so many processes. It's amazing. It's the Visa card, I guess you could say, or American Express, honored at more places. Uh, Alternative pathways to energy acquisition, and we're going to talk about, just in general ways. Have you ever wondered how a hummingbird can sustain the rate that its wings flap? And it actually modifies its ability to utilize energy more efficiently at a cost. But when you need more ATP to keep the uh, the wings to shudder like they do, it's quite interesting. So there's an adaptation for that. So we can, of course, try to keep this conversation about life and also how we utilize energy commercially and the like, because they are intertwined. Cars run on French fry oil, organisms and machines that need energy for work. Believe it or not, chemical bond energy and how fossil fuels are used are really just breaking chemical bond energy. So some of the mechanics are the same, not always, but some. So we look at energy conversions of all of life, and all of life depends on capturing energy from the sun. So all the energy, make this clear, comes from the sun. The Twinkies on the shelves at the stores, ultimately the energy came from the sun. The the hamburger from Wendy's came from the sun. The energy ultimately was transformed in a form at which can be utilized by life, and that's important. Two key processes that do this in life is photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, if you follow me through photosynthesis, then you already know what's going on in cellular respiration because it's in reverse. So it's nice because this kind of builds on itself, but it also has this transmutability, and you're going to like that. So energy in the form of chemical bonds come ultimately from the sun. Well, we also harvest energy from the sun commercially. And the semiconductor business developed solar cells, which are a form of photoreceptors that can convert high energy from the sun into electrical energy in evolts, and we get a flow of electrons as a result of some rather involved chemistry involved with photocells, but I'm not going to go into that. But we can convert energy from the light to ultimately spinning a motor, and believe it or not, life does that too. Now you've heard of some of the cars that, or you may not have heard of an experiment that was held uh, in California. I believe it was Toyota that had some hydrogen cars, and what that means is that they crack water to develop energy, and so they need a pure form of hydrogen, which is derived from ways to migrate hydrogen away from water, or cracking water, to create the hydrogen that could be pumped in the cars. And all that infrastructure was developed in California for that. It was a very successful program. It just, of course, you can imagine that the oil companies and fossil fuels and all those companies do not want to see their profits go down. So you just don't hear much about that. But there's a house. If you're interested, I can send you information that's run totally on hydrogen. And I actually invested just a few bucks because I invest in things I support. And I really think hydrogen is really cool technology. And anyhow, it's just one of many, and it's one that I like. So hydrogen basically comes from cracked water, and we use hydrogen to create a battery effect. And you can look at hydrogen here, and we have a catalyst, and the hydrogen goes ultimately to reform water. It was originally cracked from water, in other words, it was separated, and forms a catalyst through electrolyte. And we have this difference between the negative and the positive cathode. So what we have, this is a battery effect. And in the process of transferring the hydrogen, we create electric power, and its ultimate waste is water. So I think this is a good thing. And so this is just the concept of fuel cells. But we're going to talk about how nature has used this concept. I don't know if we need to get a patent from nature or whatever, but nature's been doing it for a long, long, long time. So a proton is positively electric charge, and an electron is a negative charge. Hydrogen fuel cell strips these two things apart so that electrons are free to go their own way, becoming the electricity that runs in the car's motor. Electricity is nothing more than a continuous flow of electrons. So AC is alternating current. It's just charging from positive, negative, negative. It doesn't really have a pole. It's a non-polar. It's alternating, so it alternates between the poles. And we see that we use that at the homes all the time. Meanwhile, protons become hydrogen ion, that is, hydrogen atom with a positive electric charge, and will bond together with any oxygen in the vicinity to form water. And that is a really cool concept, I think, for energy conversion, and the ultimate pollutant would be water. So the power source, we can use solar cells or solar cells to crack water to form hydrogen, distribute those using, of course, hydrogen run trucks, and that fuel the hydrogen stations. And this is what Toyota had kind of worked out, and it was successful, but it just didn't get enough popular input, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I just like to see the project work. And it was Tesla's Elon's work with the batteries. It just complements this whole area. His work is, I think, really amazing. Elon Musk is an amazing person to have such a mind like that. I wouldn't know. The sun is the source of energy that powers all living organisms. The energy from sunlight stored in the chemical bonds of molecules. When these bonds are broken, the energy is released regardless of the bond is a molecule, fuel, fossil fuels. See, that's why I try to relate the two, because they're really indistinguishable. The two being life and commercial applications for using energy. We've got to have energy. Fuel everything that we do, plus your bodies have to do the very same thing. Energy has two forms, kinetic and potential. Kinetic is energy in motion. So kinetic energy is birds flapping wings, fire. Potential energy is energy stored in an object or position, such as water trapped behind a dam, skier poised at the top of a hill. So potential energy will be released. So the potential is there, and it will release at a certain format or and such. So energy is the capacity to do work. Work is anything that involves moving matter against an opposing force. We encounter two types of energy, the kinetic and potential. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion, and potential energy is stored energy. So, pretty straightforward. So, just to review, legs pushing bike pedals is a form of kinetic. Heat, which results from a lot of molecules moving rapidly, is another form. It's energy in motion. Light is also a form of kinetic energy. We don't really understand the aspects of light. Is it electromagnetic? Is it wave? Is it particle? Or all of the above. The object does not have to be moving to have the capacity to do work, so it may have potential energy, which is stored energy that results in an object's location, position, or composition. So the water behind a dam, for example, and I really hope it stays there in the Three Gorges Dam in China. That worries me with all the flooding that they got over there. But all that potential energy is there. If a hole opens up in the dam, the water can flow and perhaps spin a water wheel or turbine, which that is the dam in China, the world's largest, is producing huge amounts of energy. Food has the potential energy in chemical bonds. We know that. That's why we love sugars like glucose and the like. And the chemical bond energy in glucose can be utilized and amassed on changing structure and function by releasing chemical bond energy to make those structures mutable, so they do something. They break a bond, or they make a bond, or doing other types of things. So energy, the capacity to do work, comes in two forms. Kinetic energy is the energy of moving objects, and potential, such as chemical energy, is stored energy that results from a position or location of an object. So we're going to be utilizing this sort of without really making much use comments about the potential kinetic. It's just going to be kind of utilized as we go forward. So energy is captured and converted, the amount of energy available to do work. Now, it's not really converted. Now, your book says that. I'd say the better word to use is transformed, but they use energy transformations here. Kinetic energy to potential. So light energy from the sun, and energy is transformed into heat and stored as chemical energy in plants. Potential energy is the chemical energy stored in muscles and liver, for an example, and energy transformed into heat, the kinetic energy of moving forward. So we use the potential energy and convert it to kinetic energy, or transform it into kinetic energy. And you can see the two transformations here. Pretty straightforward, but we've got to cover it. So energy transformation, we have the laws of thermodynamics. And a law is really just a series of observations that it's true until otherwise we find something that makes it invalid. But so thermodynamics is the study of the transformation of energy from one type to another. So that's thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics: energy can never be created or destroyed. Okay, it's transformed. So energy can never be created or destroyed. It can only change from one form to another. And I would say, instead of change, transform from one form to another. And I know it's putsy, but it's a detail nevertheless that I want to convey. So we don't actually have an explosion in the chambers in your automobile for utilizing gasoline. It's an expansion. And we kick that expansion off with a spark plug, and that creates a little spark, and it causes, we compress, and the spark plug ignites, and it expands and pushes down the piston. And the internal combustion engine has been around for a long time, but it's not very efficient, and I'm going to talk about that. I think I started out with how inefficient some of these things are. in a previous chapter. But anyhow, that is what it is. The second law of thermodynamics: every conversion of energy is not perfectly efficient. Some energy will be converted or transformed into heat. And so that's uh, energy that's a different form that can be used or not. So that is the first and second laws. So the first law of potential energy and kinetic energy, and it can't be created nor destroyed. It just transforms, and we still have 10 units, but we have it transformed into different types. We have potential and then potential and kinetic energy. You can see that there. So whether a person is converting chemical energy in a plate of spaghetti into kinetic energy of running, or for a marathon, or a car transforming chemical energy in a tank of gasoline into forward motion, which is hugely inefficient. I think every gallon of gas, it's about 30% of it's used for forward motion. The rest of it's transformed into heat and friction and all sorts of other things. Some energy is converted into heat, the least usable form of kinetic energy, unless you're cold. Anyhow, in automobiles, for example, about 3/4 of the energy in gasoline is lost. So there's 3/4. So 25% is energy that is transformed in the form of heat. That's actually used for moving forward. So yeah, 25%. So 75% is essentially goes out the window. Isn't that nice? Think about that next time you fill up your car with gas, and knowing that 75% of it's there you go. So again, the second law of thermodynamics states that every conversion of energy is not perfect, and some of it is transformed into heat. And we know this is true, and it seems like our bodies were engineered to take advantage of that through evolution or whatever. That a muscle contraction transforms about 30% of the energy for that muscle into heat. And if you notice, when you're really cold, you start shivering. Well, what's shivering doing? It's causing that muscle to contract, and as a result, you're generating 30% of that mass of that energy used for that muscle into heat. So you're going to warm the thermal part of the body, and your body does it automatically because it wants to get warm. And unfortunately, once it's transformed into heat, it's really hard to harness it to do work. It does, but it's just hard. So put another way, the second law of thermodynamics tells us that the quantity of energy in the universe is not changing. The quality is, little by little. So that's entropy, if you remember that. So heat efficiency, just remember, I think I had covered this at one time, energy efficiency and heat loss. Our homes, it's just terrible. We spend a lot of money heating, but a lot of it goes out the chimney, through the floor, through the windows, through the walls, and through the ceiling. And so what's the point? I guess the energy mongols for oil love to be involved in the design of homes, because there you go. Maybe that's where global warming is coming from. Well, I'm just joking. Just a joke. Please don't quote me on that. That was stupid. So summary: energy is neither created nor destroyed, but transformed. Each conversion of energy is inefficient, so some of the usable energy is converted or transformed into heat, which is a less useful form. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of living organisms? Well, we have ATP, and we're going to talk about ATP until ATP, you're blue in the face. It's okay. ATP is amazing. Okay, 32 kilocalories per mole is energy is released upon this high energy bond. And in your book, always uses the symbols and all that. Try to keep it the same. And so the amount of energy is released, and we make ADP as a result with inorganic phosphate. And so the trick becomes putting this inorganic phosphate back onto ADP. And I'm going to show you how we do that. And so this is the most reusable, renewable source of energy in our body is ATP. And it's amazing to think of it that way. So ATP, we now understand organisms on Earth cannot capture every single bit of energy released from the sun. Well, of course not. And the energy conversions are inefficient. We can look at the chief energy currency of the cell as ATP. Light energy from the sun carries energy and makes energy in the form of chemical bonds in sugar, fat, and proteins. None of this energy can be directly used to fuel the organism cell. It first must be captured in the bonds of a molecule called ATP. So this is the most mutable, reusable form of energy transfer is ATP to ADP, and that is without a fact the truth across the board. So it's a simple molecule with three components. The center of ATP are the two components, the small sugar molecule. It's the same one in our DNA, by the way, called adenine. And it's the third component that makes ATP so efficient in carrying and storing energy for a short time. Attached to the sugar and adenine is a chain of three negatively charged phosphate molecule groups, hence tri in a triphosphate. Because the bonds between these three phosphate groups must hold the groups together, the face of the three electrical charges that all repel one another, each of these bonds contain a large amount of energy and is stressed and unstable. The instability of these high energy bonds make the three phosphate groups like a tightly coiled spring or twig that is bent almost to the point of breaking. With the slightest push, one of the phosphate groups will pop off, releasing energy that the cell can use. And that's why it's a great candidate for this renewable, reusable source. And I like to review, sort of view that as that rechargeable NiCad or the molybdenum type battery, the NiCad type battery here. And it's rechargeable. You just put it in and recharge it. When it goes bad, you don't throw it away, you just recharge it again. And it's the same with ATP and ADP. We just recycle those. And so you can see energy with ADP, and inorganic phosphate forms ATP and releases energy when we break that bond. So it's an amazing molecule. And you can see that energy differs a little bit. Whenever you group phosphates together, you can tell right away that it's a troublemaker of some kind. It's slightly unstable, but we harness that instability. So we have ATP, and forming ADP is about 30 kilocalories per mole, or we can go and ratchet it down, and we see its release is about 30 kilocalories per mole. We see some other different types of breakings, but the most efficient really is just adding and subtracting the final phosphate group here, and that's the one that nature seems to use all the time. So there's your numbers: 30, 40, breaking down the bonds. And it's this chemical bond that is most used in nature. So that's what's important. So cells temporarily store energy in the form of ATP. The potential energy can be converted and used as fuel because it's got that chemical bond energy. Inputs of kinetic energy are converted or transformed to the potential energy of the energy-rich but unstable bonds of the ATP molecule, that's what drives life. And so that comes to the end of part 1, and getting you ready for part 2 is that you're going to never look at a leaf the same way again after we finish part 2 next time. So I hope you enjoyed part 1, and I did everything I could do to try to get you ready to explore what happens when we do photosynthesis here. And it's an amazing story, and I'll drop that on you for part 2. See you then.